Leading Britain's conversation, Cross Question, with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. This panel have a lot to live up to because our two panels this week so far have been absolutely brilliant. But I've got confidence that these will be too. We have Matt Wrack to my far right, their General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union. Sam Lister to my immediate left is Sam Lister, yeah, you are Sam Lister, Political Editor of the Daily Express. Peter Kyle is Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary and Labour MP for Hove. And we welcome back Baroness Kate Hoey, non-affiliated peer and former Labour MP. I think, Kate, you must be possibly near the record holder of the number of appearances on this programme. You are the Ken Clark of Question Time, or possibly even Nigel Farage.
Really?
Did I mean to say that? Right, we encourage you to put your questions through right now, 0345 6060 973. The earlier you phone in the hour, the more chance you'll have of getting on. You can text your question to 84850 and you can use Alexa. Just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and do watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go straight to our first caller. It's Ravi in Slough. Ravi, hello. What would you like to ask?
Hi, Ian. Hi, team. Just a quick question. Why are the government, especially Brabant, picking on international students when they pay such high fees and they actually contribute millions to the economy?
We've been talking about this subject for the last hour on the programme, and of course Suella Braverman has announced plans to restrict the length of time that foreign students can stay after they've graduated. At the moment it's 2 years, but she wants to cut it to 6 months, which may well mean that a lot of students go to other countries' universities rather than ours. Peter Kyle, I know you've got a big interest in education. What do you think of this?
I'm really surprised that she's doing it. Even by Suella Braverman's standards, this doesn't make sense. The caller there, Ravi, made a really good point about the economics, but it's far more than economics. There's a social connection as well. When people come to study in this country, they experience world-class education, but they also get a really good understanding of our culture as well, which is rich in our country. There's a lot to celebrate. Now, that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. It is also enriching for British-born students who are going to university here or studying here, because they will get access to people from all over the world. The connections are enriching for very obvious reasons, and these are connections that last a long time. I went to university later in life. I was in my late 20s when I went to university, and some of the people I studied with from around the world I'm still friends with to this day. And these are connections in a global world that really count. So it really surprises me. It diminishes, yes, economics. I represent a city, Brighton and Hove, which has 2 universities, up to 20,000 students in each, and about a quarter of those students will come from abroad. Yes, it's a good earner for the universities, but it's so much more than money. This is about enriching our country, soft power, because people will go back and talk about their experience and take those experiences with them back to their country.
If, say, 20% of those foreign students didn't come anymore, what effect would that have on your 2 universities?
It would have a profound impact on the economics, the financing of our universities. But don't forget, universities are also experiencing the same cost of living challenges that individuals are and businesses are. They are really strapped, and the tuition fees are capped. There are lots of pressures on universities at the moment, so I just simply don't understand why this would be imposed at this moment in time, because it's going to put a huge stress and strain on our higher education sector at a time when this seems to be happening in other areas as well. I don't know why this government has such an ideological problem with higher education. The Labour government, when we came in, 14% of school leavers were going to university. By the time 2010 came around, it was 43%. But yet the number climbed for a while afterwards, and now it's in steep decline again. That's not the sign of a healthy education system.
Sam Lister.
Yeah, I think clearly the Home Secretary, she is concerned about people who abuse the system. And so the policy she has come up with is designed to stop people who overstay beyond their permission. But I think you've got to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. And actually, our universities are world class. They do attract people. And actually, I think I get Peter's point about culture, but actually, I think the money is at the heart of this.
Yeah,
and actually, it's about funding the universities. It's also about boosting our economy. And at a time when the economy is in the doldrums, I think you have to kind of think carefully about turning away people who want to come here and spend money in our country.
And this could be a really big cabinet row, couldn't it? I mean, there are enough of those already, but I can't imagine Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, or Grant Shapps, the Business Secretary, thinking, yeah, this is a really good idea. So there's bound to be a few articles for you to write about
Indeed,
this.
and I do wonder what the Chancellor thinks about this, because obviously he's the man who will suffer financially, and he does not sit on the same spectrum of the party as the Home Secretary, as we all know.
Does anyone?
I was going to ask if anyone else did.
Well, actually, on the right of the party, a lot of people on the right of the party do say she does not speak for the right of the party. So, you know...
But I mean, even on the right of the Conservative Party, I still find it difficult to think. I mean, unless you are somebody who wants to reduce immigration to zero, and I can't even think of a single Conservative MP who would say that, I can't think of many people who are going to think, well, the immigration side of this outweighs the economic side of it.
Yeah, and really, actually, you know, we have control of our own borders now. I think, although the immigration numbers have actually got the net migration numbers went up, I think, you know, they have put systems in place to put our own immigration system into force, and we no longer have to abide by the EU rules. So I think, in a way, the students, it's a bit of a strange issue to kind of focus on, really, for my mind.
Right, Kate Hoey.
Well, I'm not sure it will stop many students coming. After all, they're coming because we've got a really high quality education. I agree with Peter that, you know, overseas students bring a huge amount to a university, but I do think sometimes these days, because of the money factor and the fact that they pay so much more, universities are actually perhaps getting the balance slightly wrongly in terms of relation numbers between overseas and homegrown, for another word, students. So I actually think that I can see why she wants to do it. I don't think it will make much of an effect. But 2 years does seem quite a long time, actually, for people just to be able to stay on that student visa when they've finished their studies. And I am concerned that there are some universities now where people, particularly even Cambridge and Oxford, where there are sometimes in particular subjects, homegrown local young people, not local but UK, don't actually get in because this proportion of people coming from abroad, particularly Chinese students. And frankly, you know, I would love to think that Chinese students coming here are going back with this really different attitude to culture and to music and to politics. The reality is most of them stay very, very cocooned in very, very disciplined situations. So I'm not as gung-ho about how wonderful it all is, although I think it's a great boost to a university to have overseas students, but I think there's probably getting to be too many.
In some universities, the overseas students' income will be subsidising that for British students, and one of the reasons that tuition fees haven't gone up as much as they might have done is because of the income that universities get from overseas
they get a
students.
huge amount of income, and that's why their priority is now becoming more of that. And I think we have to be just careful about that in the future, because it could go so out of kinker that we're ending up with, not helping our own students.
Matt Wrack.
Yeah, a little known fact, I actually studied as an adult at university while working shifts on fire station, including a second degree at the London School of Economics, which has a huge number of overseas students, and I met people from all over the world there. They went off to careers in finance. I went back to working on fire station. But look, I think there's a reputational thing here. Once you start sending a message that people are not particularly welcome, they will. It's an international market in terms of university education, and people will start looking elsewhere. And it's one area where the UK does lead the world in many ways, and I think it's a bit of a daft message to be sending, frankly. And it's weird as to why she's chosen to make this announcement.
Do you think there will be a real political battle over it? I mean, obviously the Labour Party is going to oppose it, but if there's a substantial number of Conservative MPs and indeed cabinet ministers that query it, I mean, this could be yet another
U-turn
argument. Well, it could be a U-turn argument that Rishi Sunak frankly needs like a hole in the head. It
just seems a little bit badly thought out, because the people who are going to come into conflict are the people running the universities, and is that the battle they want at this particular time? This doesn't make much sense to me.
Right, let's move on to another question. It's a text. Ravi, thank you for that. It's a text question from Alexandra in Barnet. Just how long will it take for women to be able to trust the police again? The Met Commissioner says we'll see 2 or 3 officers every week going on trial for a while to come. Kate, Hoey.
It's very, very depressing, the whole situation. I mean, I remember when I came to London first, years and years and years ago, the one person that you always felt when you didn't know where to go or you were needed some asked to ask a question, you'd have gone to a policeman, and that was, or a policewoman, although there weren't very many in those days. So it is a depressing situation, particularly for those of us who, been around London for a long time. There's clearly something going wrong about the way people are brought into the police, the training, the way that they are, looking into their background. Something has gone wrong. It's always very easy just to say, oh, it's all about money, but I actually don't think it's about money. I think there's just been a general change of sort of attitude to policing, that they become, it's not anymore seen as a job that you go in because you want to keep law and order and you're there to really protect the public. It seems to be a job more about now being kind of up to date with what's the latest fad, being, able to get involved in every demonstration and look like you're part of the community demonstrating. I just think that the whole Metropolitan Police, particularly because it's so big and it's so important, needs a real shake-up. And we don't seem to be able to get a commissioner who is prepared to take on some of the attitudes within the police.
Okay, Sam Lister?
Yeah, I think, it's where do you start? Because if you've got this this constant turnover of bad apples being ejected from the force over the next few years while they sort out these problems, that's just going to reinforce that these people have been in the force for many years and have been able to abuse their powers for all that time. And I think it's very hard for women to then trust the force. And I can't see how they can make people feel safe for quite some time while they're actually going through that process. I also think, actually, the Met, there are so many problems with the Met. How many times do we have scandals involving the Met? It's such a difficult force to run that whoever gets brought in, or their career always ends in failure because there's always some scandal involving officers. And you just think, actually, does the Met need to be broken up in some way? It's got counter-terror responsibilities. It's got a huge area to cover. It just seems to be unmanageable.
Matt Wrack, let's come to you. Nazir Afzal, the former Crown Prosecutor, he warned of some similar issues within the fire service as well. I mean, we've heard all about these WhatsApp groups in Charing Cross Police Station. I mean, are there similar worries in the fire service?
There was a report into the London Fire Brigade, into cultural issues in the London Fire Brigade recently, as you say. And yeah, that outlines some alarming areas of concern around misogyny and racism, and the Fire and Rescue Service has to tackle. There's been a debate that's been going on for 40 years in the Fire and Rescue Service. We've had to face up to issues ourselves as a union, and we've taken quite sometimes difficult decisions in terms of tackling that with our own members, and I think you have to do that, and you have to show leadership.
But do you feel that you have, you as a collective have done more than the Metropolitan Police have done? Or
I don't
think
think
there's still a long way to go?
The issues that were identified in that report are not on the scale at all as we've seen in relation to the Metropolitan Police. That doesn't mean they're not serious and they need to be addressed. But I think the relationship of firefighters with the community is very different because we don't have a policing role, and there's that question of the ability to take away people's freedom, as police officers do, which we don't have. So I think the scale is different, and the risks and therefore the reputational problems for policing are different.
One of the partial solutions that people have come up with saying, well, in the police force there should be 50-50 male female. Now at the moment it's about 33%, I think, in the Met, and they have made a lot of strides on that. Now the fire service is different, isn't it? Because firefighting, I'm going to be careful how I put this, but I would imagine that the reason there are far fewer female firefighters is because of the physical aspect of the job.
Not completely, no. There are clearly very strict,
get away with that, Kate?
very strict physical standards in relation to firefighting about physical fitness because of the nature of the work that is required, and to meet those, so everyone has to meet those standards and then maintain those standards, and actually maintain them for a lot longer now because the government raised the pension age, so people doing a very physical job until they're 60 and beyond. But nevertheless, there is, despite that, still underrepresentation of women, even taking account of the.
What's the percentage at the moment?
Operationally, it's below 10%. So yeah, it's worse than it is in policing.
Peter.
Thanks, and Alexander, it's a question that goes right to the heart of how we keep communities safe. There's a lot of issues here, and I think they're layered. There's always been, and for a long-standing problem with the culture in the Met, but also a cultural challenge that every police enforcement agency has, simply because of the nature of their work and the fact that it is so almost militarised in the way that its rank works. When austerity first started to bite after the first, second and third rounds of reductions in funding, police voluntary redundancies meant that a lot of people who were able to make the leap into other jobs left. The people who were most able to leave the police force early on were those who had the highest skills and had the best records. That enforced the cultural challenges that police forces had, because those with the most amount of talent, who were most willing to go on a journey of cultural change within the organisation, had left, and those who weren't remained. The thing that really worries me about all of this is that Sarah Everard's murder started a sort of domino effect. David Carrick was only exposed as a serial rapist because one of his victims, felt empowered to speak out because of Sarah Everard's murder. So the thing that really worries me is, if that hadn't happened, would we be doing what we're doing now and demanding the change that we need now? And there are some fundamentals that we've been getting wrong for a very long time. For example, we're still not doing full background checks on police applicants to become police officers. So there's a lot of issues that stem right from that moment of recruiting, and how we recruit, where we recruit from, and the type of personalities that we do recruit. It's been mentioned about whether we need to sort of deconstruct the Met and rebuild. It's interesting because I was in Northern Ireland for 3 days last week with Keir Starmer. Keir was on the board which decommissioned the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary in Northern Ireland.
He was an advisor.
He was an advisor, of course. He was an advisor to the decommissioning and then the reconstruction in the form of the PSNI, the Police Service for Northern Ireland. And I was asking him questions about that with relation to the Met. And it was quite interesting having someone go through that experience. Now, there are clearly lessons to be learned. There are clearly, when Louise Casey's full report comes out and some of the other commission reports, I think there is a lot more that we still are going to learn. Okay. And it'll have to be a very, very deep restructuring that needs to happen.
Lots of questions coming in. We'll move on to a different subject in just a moment. It's 8:20.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
23 minutes past 8. Matt Wrack from the Fire Brigades Union is with us, as is Sam Lister, political editor of the Daily Express, Peter Kyle, Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, Labour MP for Hove, and Baroness Kate Hoey, non-affiliated peer, former Labour MP. Before we go to the next question, I have got a question that I'm going to read out for you, Matt. It's a slightly uncomfortable one, but I think it's important. Vidal says, as a black man in London, I can say that every fireman of colour I know has experienced racism within the London Fire Brigade, some having to leave after breakdowns. I don't think a London Fire Brigade have moved a quarter as much compared to the Met tackling racism and prejudice. Some of the reasons cited is that many LFB officers don't actually live in London and don't respect its cultural diversity.
Look, I think a very serious point is raised, and there are certainly stories such as the one you've mentioned of firefighters from black and ethnic minority backgrounds leaving the fire service. The London Fire Brigade is the most diverse fire service in the UK, so that highlights that there's problems elsewhere other than in London. The sort of thing that we've done in our trade union is we have created equality sections. So we have sections of the union specifically for black members, for women and for LGBT members, so that those issues can be addressed where people feel confident and able to do so. But nobody's denying that debate goes on. The point about living in London is an important one, that less than half, I think, now of London firefighters are able to live in London. It raises an issue about why is it that people providing public services can't afford to live in the capital that they serve. That actually simply addressing that issue would probably increase the diversity overnight. Of when I joined London, I worked in the London Fire Brigade. When I joined under the old GLC, you had to live in the Greater London area. I think today that would overnight, as I say, increase the diversity in the London Fire Brigade. But but
it would also mean that you'd lose X percentage of the staff.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm certainly not arguing that at all. But I think that there is a question of why is it that, and it's not just firefighters, other public servants in the health service and so on are living so far away from the place where they work.
Right, let's move on to, unless any of you particularly want to contribute to that, let's move on to Ulf in Hamburg. Ulf, very good evening to you. Now, you always ask brilliant questions, so I'm expecting another one.
Okay, great. Germany is inching, in my opinion, towards a position of leadership in matters of defense and security in Europe. Do you agree, and are you sure you want that?
Sam Lister.
Wow, okay. I mean, I think, if I understand correctly, you're referring to the tanks, the tank announcement. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I think it's taken Germany a long time to kind of get dragged there. I think I'm not quite clear why they couldn't announce this last Friday when they had the conference. I think that's what people were hoping for, but I think it's a very good thing that it has now happened. I think Britain has led the way on this. I think that is largely in part down to Boris Johnson, whatever his many faults may be. And, you know, he has been pushing the cause again this weekend, calling on allies to give the kit they can. And I'm glad to see Germany and America now following that lead.
Do you think we've got to the point, 70 years after World War II, when we've got over the sort of the fear of German, shall we call, leadership in defence, that we don't always have to hark back to history, that Germany has proved itself as a democratic nation now, and we expect it to fulfil the role of one of the world's leading economies? I
think so. I mean, it's a completely different country to 70 years ago, isn't it, clearly? And I think that the world has moved on and people expect Germany to play its part in something like this. You know, clearly all the rest of Europe and our NATO allies are in the same kind of place on this, and Germany obviously has a leading role to play. And I think I don't personally, I'm not aware of people who have a problem with Germany playing that role.
I think this is really interesting, and it's the difference between, and I'd really love to hear what Olaf thinks about this, because it's the difference. Ulf, beg your pardon. It's my first time meeting him. I think you're all friends.
He's a
by the
regular.
sounds of it. It's the difference between us looking in from Britain at Germany and Germany having a period of reflection themselves and the way they view themselves and their role. We are all impacted by the history and the legacy of the Second World War. It still permeates our discourse. The fact that we were so comfortable and rightly comfortable about providing and supporting supports and armaments and other types of support for Ukraine and President Zelensky is something we are proud of. But we have a history, and it's an important history, one of being comfortable with being offensive at times like this. Now, you have to understand, for Germany, I do have sympathy for the way they approach this and the thoughtfulness of them, the way they have. 27 million Russians died on the invasion of Russia, defending their territory because of Hitler. 27 million people. Now, Germany is still coming to terms with the scale of the impact of the Second World War. So it is understandable why they would be more reflective at times when they're having to move from being a purely defensive approach to their defence to one of being more proactive and perhaps even offensive in the use of their weapons. I understand that. I think, in response to Ulf, that it is a good thing that Germany is showing more leadership. But leadership in the 2020s is very different from leadership in previous generations, and that's the key thing, because leadership today is actually as part of a partnership, and we need Germany as part of that partnership. And crucially, we need to make sure that Britain is front and centre in that partnership, because a lot of these decisions are being taken at the EU level as well as the NATO level, and we need to make sure that we're never frozen out from it. We need to make sure that Germany is there at the table. They, in one swoop of a pen earlier last year, they doubled their spending on defence, which meant
they said they were going to.
Well,
there's
they're
been
in the
precious
process
little evidence of them doing it.
But they are already in the process of spending more than double our defence budget. So the tectonic plates are shifting. I understand the cultural baggage which Germany carries, and we need to be mindful of that and not just condemn them when they take a little bit more time, because them being at the top table is significant and it's important and it's something that we should welcome.
I'm going to come to Kate and Matt after the news, but just something that I'd like you to think about, Ulf, and I'll come back to you when they've given their answers. I wonder whether this is a generational thing. That when my generation, I think in Germany, and that's I lived in Germany in the 1980s for a couple of years, was essentially a pacifist generation. They didn't like nuclear power. They certainly didn't like American nuclear weapons being on German soil. And I just wonder, Ulf, whether you think that has changed over the last couple of generations. So we'll come back to you in just a moment. It's 8:31 on LBC. Charlotte Morgan has the news headlines.
The US has confirmed it will follow Germany and the UK in sending battle tanks to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky says he's grateful for the support, while Moscow is calling it an escalation. The head of the Metropolitan Police says around 3 officers every week will appear in court on criminal charges in the coming months. Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley says many of the cases will involve violence against women. A man's been arrested on suspicion of assaulting former Health Secretary Matt Hancock on the London Underground. His office say he wasn't hurt but have described it as an unpleasant encounter. LBC weather, rain clearing for most later, scattered showers continuing over northern Scotland and an overnight low of -1.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:34, we have Matt Wrack, Sam Lister, Peter Kyle and Kate Hoey with us. We're talking about Germany, and Ulf's question is, does the panel want to see Germany take a leading role in the defence and security of Europe? Kate Hoey.
Well, I obviously welcome very much, and I hope Ulf does as well, the fact that Germany has agreed to send tanks to help Ukraine. And the word really here is partnership, and something like this, which actually, the Russian aggression affects the whole world. It's something that we can't ignore, and Germany has been quite slow in getting involved for all the reasons probably that Peter's already mentioned. But in terms of a leadership role, I mean, they haven't shown much of a leadership on energy and on climate change and on whole issues that actually I think they're going to have to do quite a bit more before we'd want them to be seen as the leadership country in the EU. And of course, in terms of all our defence and security, it's NATO that I don't think, I mean, the EU are obviously doing their bit, but they're a lot slower, a lot more unwilling to take risks. And I think ultimately we as the United Kingdom have to still see NATO as the crunch.
It has been interesting, hasn't it, that Europe has been virtually united on this. I mean, there hasn't been...
The whole of Europe, you mean, not the EU.
There hasn't been a splintering off.
No.
And I think that's been one of the remarkable things over the last year, that Putin has not been able to separate different European nations despite trying to.
No, and it's, with America as well, it's he must, whatever he's saying publicly, Putin must be beginning to realise that this isn't working out perhaps the way he had originally intended. Now, whether he accepts that eventually and, comes to terms with that he's not going to get what he originally wanted, I don't think so.
Matt Wrack.
I'm going to be out of step here, I think. You mentioned, Iain, the sort of post-war generation being an anti-war generation. Actually, I think that's a good thing.
I meant in Germany.
I think more widespread than that. I think the people who lived through the Second World War and saw the horrors of that, the people who saw the defeat of the Americans in Vietnam and the horrors of that war, who saw the fiasco of Suez, were very much it created an anti-war mood, and regimes were therefore reluctant to embark on war for a long time. I think that's actually a good thing. I don't think war is a good thing. We've seen actually over the past 30 years a militarisation of politics and a militarisation of the world, and we're seeing that reflected today. If I can just pick up Peter's point about Germany, actually this will be used in a nationalist way by Putin. The remembrance of the Second World War and the invasion of the Soviet Union by Germany is a huge feature of public life in Russia.
Yeah, that's very true.
And it will undoubtedly be used to exacerbate that agenda. I think, and I've lived through a few wars, and the British establishment, the British political establishment actually generally goes along with them. And then years later, we find out truths that were withheld from us at the time. That has happened in relation to Iraq on a massive scale. And we're still living with the consequences of that.
Well, you are right on that, but there are righteous...
Yeah, I mean, this is very different from Iraq. This is a independent
the
country
Falklands
invading
War
another...
was totally justified. I don't think many people would say that wasn't. I think this is, given that Kosovo as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just sort of say that all war... all wars are horrible, fine, but you can't say that all wars are unjustified.
No, I'm not saying all wars are unjustified. I'm sceptical about what is being done here in relation to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
In what way? What should we have done then? Just let Putin have it?
The question of dealing with Putin is a matter for the Russian people, and I suspect I'd be in prison if I was in Russia, and would be on
might
protests.
Be in government. You might be in government.
I doubt it.
How'd you put that?
No. Silly thing to say. I would be on anti-war protests if I was a Russian citizen. I don't think you can get away from the fact that the perception of this, there are dangerous nationalist elements on both sides of this conflict that are being, are being not addressed by British politicians. And I think we're heading for very dark times.
But you're surely not saying that they're both the same in this.
No, I'm not saying they're both the same.
The wars you mentioned a second ago, I think just two quick things on what you said, because every war you mentioned earlier was an offensive war from Allied countries, Western countries.
Not according to Tony Blair, was it?
This is very clearly a defense.
That's not true, Peter.
This is very clearly a defensive war. Secondly, when you said that we've become a militarised state, spending on defence in our country has moved from 10% to 2% of our national spending in a period of about 20 years, and the same is true for the European Union and also as a overall spending in the United States too. So, we've actually moved away from being a militarised state since the Cold War quite profoundly.
And there is a drive to remilitarise. And Tony Blair was very clear that this was the invasion of Iraq was a necessary defensive action. And I don't know what you would have said at the time. I was marching against the war. I don't know what your position was at the time. I think people like me who opposed that war have been vindicated by history. The people who sided with that war have been found to have
in principle,
been
though, are you saying this is not a defensive war for Ukraine? This is that they are not defending themselves from invasion?
Of course they are defending themselves. What I'm sceptical about and concerned about is the level of other interventions by NATO and others.
Well, I voted against the Iraq war, but I have campaigned and did all the things that people did who were opposed to it. But I really can't see that in any way like the situation here.
All right, well, let's not go into the whole history of Iraq. We've done that far too often. Ulf, I want to bring you back. What do you make of what you've heard?
Well, let me first make a few comments. Olaf Scholz needed a bit more time to make that decision because he needed to blackmail President Biden into providing Ukraine with Abrams tanks. That's what it was all about. He doesn't want Germany to take point. He wants Germany maybe take a leadership role, but backed up by lots of others, so Germany will not be Russia's hate object number one. That might not work out, but that's the reasoning behind it. He just said so an hour ago in an interview. And the generational issue, I don't think so. Germany was never really pacifist. That is often misunderstood. Those anti-nukes protests were against a very specific kind of armament that, in the view of the protesters, made it more likely for Germany to be annihilated in a nuclear war, which in itself was considered to have become more likely due to those short-range nuclear missiles. It doesn't matter whether you agree or not, but that was the idea. There was never a big majority or even a big minority for Germany leaving NATO or so. That was always accepted. No, it was always clear we are part of the West and we need weapons to defend ourselves against the Soviet threat. That was general consensus. What we Germans lack is any sort of gung-ho sentiment. That does not exist. If we do anything of that nasty sort, we do it because we have to.
Ulf, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to the Ulf Show on LBC. This is a question with no name. Do put your names on text. Does the Labour Party have a women problem? That's Rosie Duffield, the Labour MP for Canterbury. She made that allegation in an interview this week. Peter Kyle.
I'm a man, and it's not for me to dispute the perspectives and views that somebody who's gone through life and had the experiences that Rosie has. From Rosie's perspective, it does. And that means I want to engage with Rosie and listen to Rosie. Rosie's a friend of mine. We talk very often. And we've been texting back and forth, not about that issue, but about other issues.
Well, presumably the conduct of your constituency neighbour, Lloyd Russell Moyle, who intimidated her.
Who also apologised, and quite rightly so.
Eventually.
He apologised. So, but look, if somebody makes the claims that Rosie has, they need to be listened to, respected and engaged with on her own terms. That's how we move forward at issues like this. I am not defensive about it at all. You know, we live in a world where different perspectives should be welcomed. In fact, different perspectives are what makes us strong as a united team, as a united party that seeks to govern the country. So you will never hear me shutting down these discussions. I think we have moved forward hugely. That 52% of our representation in Parliament is women. We've done really well in trying to support women into Parliament and then support them when they are in Parliament. Parliament politics presents very specific challenges for women in public life and in politics. You know, I, for one, have tried really hard to try and figure out how I can be an ally and be somebody who supports the specific challenges that people have from my perspective. So you certainly won't have me, downplaying in any way the claims that Rosie has, even though I have a different perspective on it.
OK. Kate Hoey, you were a Labour MP for many, many years. Do you think the Labour Party has a women problem?
Well, I think it could be helped by if the leader of our party, my former party, actually was able to give a definition of what he thought a woman was. That doesn't help to start with. But I have to say, when I came in with 41 women MPs out of 600 and whatever it was, over 30 years ago, I didn't feel there was that discrimination once you were in Parliament. I think the party has done a huge amount to obviously get more women MPs. It's rather ironic that the party that's got, women's sections and has to have mandatory women-only shortlists has ended up with, having front page news on something about one individual MP who clearly has been treated appallingly. And from what she said, it sounded like the party at leadership level hadn't really taken it seriously. So, a woman problem can be defined in all sorts of different ways. I would say that once you're in Parliament as a woman, if you're just a normal, strong woman, you won't suffer from the discrimination that sometimes people assume is happening to you. But I definitely think the party has a problem with this whole question of trans issues, and I just wish there was some common sense, and Keir Starmer would actually be sensible and come out and basically say what the vast majority of people in the country think.
Matt?
Look, I work in a very male-dominated industry, and my union's very male as a result of that. And we have had to, as you mentioned in the earlier point, we've had to address that through specific structures for women within the fire and rescue service, for women within our union. And it does take a lot of bravery sometimes for women to speak out in the fire service. So we're used to dealing with that issue, and I think special measures have been introduced for us and in the Labour Party, and that's to be welcomed. In terms of the trans debate,
let's not get into that, because we're going to be talking about that after.
I was simply going to say, we put out a call as a union. So the debate's taking place in our union as well, and we put out a call for calm, rational debate on it, and that's, I think, unfortunately, sometimes in that particular debate, there is not enough calmness and listening to other people.
Let's hope we have some calmness after 9. Sam Lister.
I'll just start by making the point that the party, supposedly of equality and of opportunity, is the one party that's never had a woman leader. It's a very basic point. And I think from memory, every single party across the UK, including smaller parties, has had a woman leader, including Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Labour is the one that hasn't. And you do have to wonder why, out of all those women of talent in the party, nobody can coalesce around one to be leader, and it always ends up being a man. That aside, on the issue...
So we should have had Liz Truss then. That's what the Labour Party is missing.
Actually, men can be failures.
Exactly. Indeed, yeah.
And
indeed.
Out of 3 women, obviously Liz Truss's tenure did not go well, but they've had 2, and one of those served for quite some time.
And you're forgetting Theresa May.
No, sorry, of the other 2.
Oh, right.
Of the other
okay,
2. But anyway, men are allowed to fail, women aren't, and that really kind of illustrates the point. If you don't mind me saying.
No, the point you're making is that we should have had one just because they're a woman, rather than.
No. My point is, out of all those women, Are you saying
women
there's
candidates.
no? Are you saying there's no women
Nobody
of
called
talent?
Well, we've had two acting
it always
leaders who are
reverts to
women.
acting
We had
leaders
the first. We have a very strong deputy leader in Angela. We have the first female minister was a Labour minister, Margaret Bonfield, who served her apprenticeship in Hove, the constituency I represent.
And you've still not had a woman leader.
No, so listen, we have tried, and the first party to get more than 50% representation of women in Parliament is the Labour Party. So yes, we haven't managed to get a woman as leader, and I hope we can. I'm somebody who's only ever supported a woman for leader in the first opportunity I've had. No, well, it is. We really care about equality, and as I say, you want to focus on the leader. I am focusing on the whole organisation.
It was my first point. If I could go on to the second point, but what I would say is,
but transforming entire parties.
We're slightly running out of time. Can you make your second point?
Yeah, the second point on just the way Rosie Duffield has been treated. It has been appalling. It has been appalling, and she serves as a warning to women in the Labour Party to shut up, because if you don't, you end up isolated and abused.
Okay.
Well, hang on a sec.
Well,
Jess,
no,
Jess,
Peter,
that's right. Jess Phillips wouldn't agree with that. Nobody's ever. So, and I think what you're doing there is downplaying the strength that Rosie has. I think Rosie is formidable. She is extraordinary.
Okay,
she is strong.
Let's all agree on that.
She says
in society. It is in society.
She
has
says
to bring us to a conclusion. It's
in her
10
own
to
words,
9.
she says,
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Matt Wrack, Sam Lister, Peter Kyle and Baroness Kate Hoey answering your questions. Let's go to Jay in St Ives in Cambridgeshire. Hello, Jay.
Yeah, good evening. I've got a really simple question for you guys. Hopelessly weak. Was Keir Starmer right today?
That's what he said about the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. So you got me going there, Jay. Hopelessly weak. Matt Wrack.
Absolutely, yes. I think the whole country thinks something needs to be done about millionaire tax dodgers, particularly if they end up in the cabinet. And unfortunately,
let's be careful here, because I don't think there's any allegation that Rishi Sunak is a millionaire tax dodger, is there?
No. Well, dealing with millionaire tax dodgers, we've got a party in power, 4 millionaires acting on behalf of millionaires, made up of millionaires, and I think everyone can see that. Everyone can see. It's like two different worlds. There's the world of Rishi Sunak and Mr. Zahawi, and then there's the world and the people they represent and deal with, and then there's a world of the rest of us, the people who are struggling to pay their bills, the public sector workers on strike over pay. And I think people are gobsmacked that nothing is done about this, and the level of injustice and inequality that is allowed to persist, and nothing is done about it.
But is Rishi Sunak weak? Is that fair? Because some people would say, well, at least we haven't got the chaos of the Johnson and Truss administrations, that the adults are back in the room.
Adults are back in the room. Well, no, I think they have no mandate. Their mandate has expired. There's one useful thing Rishi Sunak could do, and that is resign and call a general election. Okay. I think that's the view of the majority of the people.
Kate?
Well, I don't think being a millionaire makes you a tax voider, but I do think that he is the person we're talking about, is the chairman of the Conservative Party, so he's the face of conservatism. And I must admit that I think every single person sitting around the country watching, hearing about all of this, when they're struggling to pay their bills and so on, will be thinking this doesn't look good. I think Rishi Sunak has done what he said he would, which is set up his ethics person that everyone was clamouring to get appointed now to look into this. And I think it's only fair that, we wait till that report comes out. But my view is that this is something that eventually he will not be there.
Sam?
Yeah, I think if you talk to people around Rishi Sunak, the whole strategy here is to allow due process to take its course, to allow the independent ethics advisor to investigate and then make a decision based on that, rather than a kind of kangaroo court. The politics often just isn't like that, and you have to just deal with the events you are kind of presented with. And I think he might regret not kind of acting sooner, if I'm honest.
Peter?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to this. Firstly, it's his character. I think that he is an unsubstantial figure. I don't think his character matches the scale of leadership that our country faces and needs. And then secondly, he's weak because he is in a weak position. He doesn't have the political strength to take on and lead his own party, which is why recesses get extended, which is why bills get pulled from Parliament. If he was strong, he wouldn't have had to pull the planning legislation and some other education legislation from Parliament just on the eve of the vote. He wouldn't have had to have the offer of votes from Labour to get things through. He wouldn't need the Keir Starmer standing up saying, if you're going to get a deal on the protocol, we'll give you the votes to get it through because we don't think you're going to get it on your own side. So I don't think he has the heft, the political heft as a leader to set out a clear vision and then just march towards it and to take people with him. But he doesn't also have the political strength to carry the load of his party.
Right, a text question. Thank you, Jay. A text question from Gemma in Lincoln. Ricky Gervais and Towie's Pete Wicks have slammed the government for not banning the import of animal fur. Why hasn't this ban been introduced yet? We've got to have really short answers on this, Kate.
I've no idea.
That's a very short answer and admirably honest.
Don't know what the question is. The question.
Why hasn't the ban on the importation of animal fur been introduced yet?
I can't answer that.
Can anyone answer it?
I don't know, but if it came in, I'd vote for the ban. If that helps.
This is the weakest round of answers we've had in the history of this question.
It's hard to answer why a negative.
Sam, you can't help us out either. Okay, right, let's move on to our fun text question.
I thought that was it.
Just pretend. No, it wasn't. Let's just pretend the last question never happened, shall we? Neil is in Southampton. He says, the retired British astronaut Tim Peake is going to host a new TV show about space. If you were hosting a nerdy TV show, what would it be about? Clearly not animal fur. What's your secret specialist subject? Who would like to start us off? Sam, go on, help me out here.
Wow, I really do.
We can't have two useless rounds in a row.
I'll tell you what. I have discovered later in life exercise. I would do a Jane Fonda type exercise class.
No one wants to
How
see
about
that. Kate, Hoey.
Oh, I really can't think of anything that I would do. I suppose something about journalists and the way they behave and some nerd.
We certainly don't want that.
No.
Matt.
Yeah,
You must have a
predictable. Perhaps we have a strange collection of fire service memorabilia in our head office. So antique hose, helmets,
that'd be nice.
fire engines, ladders. And we can all discuss how ladders were constructed in the 1970s compared with today.
BBC Four would have it.
Exactly. Coming to UK Gold in the next few months. Matt Wrack on fireman's hoses. I'd watch.
I don't.
Sam, you haven't got anything to add, have you?
I'm feeling
You've all
totally
lamentably
floored.
failed in the having done a brilliant job for the first 55 minutes. You've all failed in the last 5
My
minutes.
show would be interesting.
Yeah, to a very small minority. Right, thank you all very much indeed. Matt Wrack, Sam Lister, Peter Kyle and Kate Hoey. Coming up in the next hour, Nicola Sturgeon's government has refused to order that a male-bodied rapist be removed from a female jail after insisting the rights of the sex offender had been properly considered. I'm not sure that I would agree that sex offenders have any rights, would you? Well, the government this evening have put out a statement saying that they're issuing new guidance on this and that no prisoner who has male genitalia should be in a female prison. I would say about time too. Or is that being insensitive to trans rights? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner says 2 or 3 of his officers could appear in court every week in the coming months. He's warning more painful stories will come out as the force tries to change its systematic failings. Matt Wrack is the General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union. He's told Cross Question problems are not unique to policing.
There was a report into the London Fire Brigade, into cultural issues in the London Fire Brigade recently that outlines